When you think of the Revolutionary War, there were a lot of names involved, but none more important than George Washington. From 1752 to 1758, he held ranks of major and colonial with the British militia in the French and Indian Wars. In 1763, as the French and Indian War ended, Great Britain was left with little monetary reserves. To refill these, they decided to impose new taxes on the North American colonies. Starting with the Sugar Act in 1764, which taxed imported sugar, molasses, and other goods into the American colonies. In 1765, Britain announced the first direct tax on the colonies in the Stamp Act. The colonies were furious over these taxes, citing taxation without representation was an abomination. 1767. The Townshend Acts were announced, which were a series of 4 more tax acts, stoking more outrage. Early 1770 British troops were dispatched to calm the outrage of the Townshend Acts. Colonists threw snow and oysters at the troops, triggering one to accidentally discharge his firearm, causing others to follow. 5 colonists died that day in what was termed as the Boston Massacre. Washington had stepped in, calling for a ban on English goods until taxes were dropped. The only tax left after that ban was the tea tax, so the colonies started getting most of their tea from Dutch smugglers. In 1773, when the British East India Company was in a financial drought, Great Britain levied the Tea Act to help try and sell 17 million pounds of tea. Samuel Adams and the Sons of Liberty organized a protest in Boston Harbor. They dumped over 300 chests of East India tea into the harbor, in what is referred to as the Boston Tea Party. After that, Britain levied punitive taxes for the loss and added the Quartering Act, which required the colonies to house British soldiers. The First Continental Congress was formed, and the colonies began an 8-year insurrection that changed the course of history. Patrick Henry gave a fiery speech about colonial rights, stating, "Give me liberty or give me death." By April, frustrated with the American colonies, England sent General Gage and his troops to seize the military stores at Concord. The Ride of Paul Revere warned the colonials that the British were coming. They met them at Lexington but had to withdraw as they were outnumbered. The Battle of Lexington and Concord grew bigger as more Americans came out to assist in fighting off the British. By the end, England had lost almost 300 troops, to Americans just under 100. England took over Boston with over 6,500 troops, led by General Gage. In May, Washington stormed into the Second Continental Congress in full military garb, signaling he was prepared for war. That same day, Benedict Arnold and Ethan Allen's Green Mountain Boys captured Fort Ticonderoga. Washington founded the Continental Army, as Congress unanimously declared him full general and commander-in-chief. The Siege of Boston started in late 1775. The first battle there was the Battle of Bunker Hill, where British forces declared victory, although at a heavy cost. British forces suffered casualties of just over 1,000 troops killed or wounded, while the Americans suffered similar casualties just shy of 500. Recognizing the Americans as a separate colony, France started to provide covert aid to the Americans. The colonists sent declarations authored by Thomas Jefferson and John Dickinson to avoid declaring war. January of 1776, a publication of common sense was put out by Thomas Paine, igniting the favor of independence by the colonies. In March, General Washington led his Continental Army in Boston, ending the stalemate there and causing the British troops to evacuate. As states started to offer their own declarations, Congress entrusted a committee of 5 delegates with composing one. They were Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, Robert Livingston, and Roger Sherman. July 4, 1776, the Declaration of Independence was issued. It was signed by delegates from all 13 colonies, starting with the President of the Second Continental Congress. In August of 1776, the first actual battle of the American Revolution was the Battle of Long Island, New York. Due to having superiority in numbers and vessels in the sea, the British held off Washington and his troops, eventually causing them to flee. The next couple months, they continued chasing Washington and pushing him further. The Battle of Harlem Heights saw the Americans stall the British a bit. Washington was pushed further into fleeing at the fight on Chatterton Hill. Instead of pressing further, the Brits headed back to Manhattan, taking Fort Washington shortly after. Losing Fort Washington was the biggest blow, as over 3,000 troops were imprisoned and the loss of valuable cannons and supplies. Shortly after, General Cornwallis's troops took Fort Lee as well, pushing the rest of the Americans into New Jersey. In November, Cornwallis's troops pushed in New Jersey as well, causing Washington to flee to Pennsylvania on the west bank of the Delaware River. While Washington got away, his troops were badly beaten. Feeling the waters and area were too cold, the British felt they would wait until the Delaware froze over before pursuing. The Americans were in panic mode as the members of the Continental Congress fled Pennsylvania for Baltimore. Beaten and morale withering, in December, Washington came across another publication by Paine titled The American Crisis. He had it read to his troops, inspiring many to re-enlist for another year of service, shoring up collapsing forces. Finding out that a large portion of British troops returned to Manhattan, Washington devised a plan to take back New Jersey. Washington and his men sailed across the icy Delaware River on the early evening hours of December 25, 1776. They showed up early the next morning, battling through the dark and snow to catch them off guard in the Battle of Trenton. The Americans captured almost 1,000 troops, killing 20 without suffering any losses of their own. The biggest wound on the American side was the 18-year-old Lieutenant James Monroe, who suffered a near-fatal shoulder wound. Monroe was promoted to captain for his heroics in helping seize Trenton. Washington gathered his men, prisoners, and captured supplies and crossed back across the Delaware. After regrouping, Washington and his men crossed the Delaware again to seize control of Trenton, New Jersey. Cornwallis was in Princeton at the time, and upon hearing this sent troops for a second Battle of Trenton, which was won by the Americans. Washington, expecting Cornwallis to send more troops next time, went there for the Battle of Princeton instead. The battles of Trenton and Princeton are noted as the first successful campaigns for the Americans, which raised 1777. Congress adopted what is now called the Betsy Ross flag, the first flag of the United States of America. In early fall, Washington lost the Battle of Brandywine and retreated as British took over Philadelphia. The battles of Saratoga took place in October, which became the turning point of the war for the Americans, as Major General Horatio Gates led them to victory. Washington tried a sneak attack at the Battle of Germantown, but the fog was too much for both sides, and another retreat was made. As a second Battle of Saratoga took place, Americans were starting to falter, until General Benedict Arnold showed up on horseback with more troops. Britain surrendered almost 6,000 troops in those battles. Due to the Americans winning, France now recognized the U.S. independence and started preparations to assist their revolution. France sent in Baron von Steuben, a German officer in the service of France. He helped train the Revolutionary Army through the winter. In March of 1778, the USS Randolph engaged the British HMS Yarmouth off the coast of Barbados, but the Randolph was destroyed. That summer at the Battle of Monmouth, the training showed as they held their ground against British troops, even being outnumbered 2-1. The battle was thought to be lost as one of Washington's generals ceded the field, but as troops fled, Washington rushed in to assume command and drove them back. As both sides rested, exhausted from the heat, the British fled through the night. Late summer saw French and American troops besiege Newport, Rhode Island. That winter, Washington moved the Continental Army into winter quarters around Middlebrook, New Jersey. The 1779 campaign saw the Continental Army go on the defense to regroup. This angered Britain's General Clinton, who went on a small rampage to try and draw Washington out, but he didn't bite. Instead, Washington used spies over the summer to take small strategic blows when opportunities came. In September, John Paul Jones and the USS Bonhemi Richard captured the HMS Serapis near the English coast. That winter, Washington's main army started camping at Morristown, New Jersey. As the Brits captured Charleston in May of 1780, Washington's army dealt with mutiny in a couple regiments, but they were resolved quickly. In August, the Battle of Camden took place as General Gates led a field against General Cornwallis. After a costly strategy mistake by Gates, they lost the battlefield and fled. He was then replaced with General Nathaniel Greene. Washington also put Benedict Arnold in charge of West Point. A short time later, he captured Major John Andre, which turned out to be Arnold's British contact with documentation proving Arnold was a traitor. Arnold led missions for the British, but eventually fled back to England. As Andre Cornwallis continued south through the Carolinas, branches of his army were dropping to local militias. In March, he met General Greene on the Battle of Guilford Courthouse, Greensboro. Greene's strategy fared much better, but in the end, he was forced to withdraw. In May, Greene tried taking North Carolina Post 96, but they fled shortly after no British backups were close. As Cornwallis was moving around the Carolinas freely, he was ordered to regroup and build the stronghold back in Yorktown, Virginia. In the fall, as the French arrived by sea too for the Battle of the Capes, General Greene and his men were at the Battle of Eutaw Springs. Greene's men issued some heavy blows, but eventually both sides retreated, and this became the last battle in South Carolina. With the French support at sea and extra boots on the ground, Washington decided to move on Yorktown. The siege of Yorktown took 3 weeks and ended with General Cornwallis's official surrender. As word got out, British troops started evacuating through 1782. Washington established the Badge of Military Merit, now known as the Purple Heart. Shortly after British and Americans signed the Articles of Peace in November, British evacuated Charleston, NC. After Congress ratified the preliminary peace treaty in April, that following September, the Treaty of Paris was signed. That winter, the British evacuated the last occupied area of New York City as Washington bids farewell. With the Treaty of Paris, the American Revolution was officially over, and the United States of America was born. While nobody knows for sure the exact count of casualties, with the harsh winters, battles, and diseases spreading, it's estimated around 50,000 troops perished through those 8 years.